Alabama has the path to the SEC championship game right in front of them if they can take care of business. They need a little bit of help. But do you want to see Bama play for the SEC championship game? And has that game jumped the shark? What'd you think about Alabama's win? The backup quarterbacks got in. We got opinions on all that and more. Welcome to Cover Crimson. He's Clint Lamb. I'm Mick Gillispie. We got Chris Marler coming on as well. So let's get this thing going. And I hope you guys are having a great Sunday. All right, there he is, Clint Lamb and Mick Gillispie. Guys, like, subscribe, thumbs up when you hang out with us here on our channel, and we appreciate you so much for being here. Clint, reflections on that Saturday that was college football. I know we talked a lot about the Alabama game on the post-game show, but now that Georgia took care of Tennessee and kind of how everything else is unfolded, South Carolina beat Missouri, it looks like Bama could go right to the SEC championship game if they can win their last two games. Is that good?
But that's the big question, right? I mean, I would think that it would be good. I want to say, and maybe I'm wrong because I don't see more people talking about this, but I thought I'd heard the College Football Playoff Committee, or at least maybe someone during that show, mention the fact that they're not going to punish a team for playing in the conference championship if it results in a loss. I mean, someone's got to lose there. If both teams are college football playoff picks prior to or going in, you can't have the result of that game unless like it's a very lopsided, very ugly loss for one of the two teams. I don't see how you could leave someone out. But at the same time, there's a lot of teams right now, especially in the SEC, vying for a playoff spot, and there's only so many. It's going to depend on how many Big Ten teams they let in. It's going to depend on a lot of different factors, to be honest with you. So that's something that I'm keeping an eye on is, if you're Alabama, you're playing two teams that I think they're tougher opponents due to both where the game is going to be taking place, like this next Saturday against Oklahoma. The fact that it's a rivalry game can really help Auburn, right the ship a little bit, correct a lot of their problems this season if they can win in that Iron Bowl. But at the same time, when you look at like the records, it's going to hurt Alabama's strength of schedule. There's no doubt about it. And on top of that, so because of that, I guess is the way to put it, you've got, in my opinion, just to remove all doubt going potentially into the SEC championship, you've got to play really good football over these next 2 weeks because Alabama looks like one of the best teams in the country, and they've looked like it really since the Missouri game. And so you've got to continue that. You're in a much better place, a much more complete team than Oklahoma. Obviously, Auburn is actually in some ways a pretty good football team, but they've got enough deficiencies where the gap should be pretty wide there too. It's all about getting wins. You have to win out. That's priority number one. But I also wouldn't mind if Alabama could figure out a way to maybe get some style points, much in the same way that they did against LSU.
Well, we're finding out that LSU lost to Florida. That's a good win, but without the offensive line being able to block consistently, they're just not that good of a team. But it's still a good win. Look, I'm not going to take that away from them. Going to Oklahoma is still going to be tough. They've got players. They've got 4 and 5 stars all over the field. To me, Clint, the most important thing for this Bama team is staying focused and also being able to handle success. And they're going to be probably like a 10, 13, 14-point favorite at Oklahoma, I would think. You can't look at that and go, hey, you know what? It's all about just figuring out a way to win. It'd be great to get style points, but I worry that they just need to take care of business because you lose to Vandy, you lose to Tennessee. I think both of those teams are good. I think Tennessee could be really good if Nico could throw a deep ball. I got the best running back in the conference, but you still, to me, I worry about every game. And I know some of you guys get in the comment section and you're like, oh, Mick's worried again. Hell yeah, I'm worried. I worry about every game, man. I mean, like I really do, because if they're not focused and they don't do the little things right, they're going to fall. They almost lost to Auburn last year, and that team was terrible too.
That's right. And a lot of the counter to that by a lot of people is going to be, well, this one's in Bryant-Denny Stadium. That type of game is different when it's in Bryant-Denny, and you're correct. But it's just you've got to it's not really just about like style points. That matters, but you've just got to focus on playing your absolute best football down the stretch. You're starting to play it. We've seen it over multiple weeks between Missouri, LSU, and the fact that you go out there against Mercer and you play a really, for the most part, a very sound football game, did what you needed to do against a subpar opponent. You've got to continue to play that way and keep that same energy, that same focus that you've been hearing about from Tyler Booker and Jahad Campbell. And so that's something that I'll be curious to see, not only, throughout the course of this week, like listening to the coaching press conferences, listening to the players on Tuesday, but also, how does that translate? Because they'll be saying all the right things, I'm sure, but how will that translate to a tough road environment against a pretty good defense? That is certainly something to keep an eye on. If they go to Norman and they have like a Kentucky last year type of performance where they can really dominate. Now, there was a lull there. They handed momentum over to Kentucky, played very poorly there for a while, but overall, Alabama showed that they were not only a better football team than Kentucky, but substantially better. If they can have that type of performance and hopefully avoid that lull that they had in that game and just continue to dominate for 4 quarters, you can really make a statement. And I really think you can continue to carry some of this momentum into the Iron Bowl and potentially into the SEC championship. Because I will say it's looking a lot more likely that Alabama is going to be participating in that game. And while I maintain this belief that I've had, which is Alabama is going to get in if they make it to the SEC championship, the committee is not going to punish them. You look at the 2023 Georgia squad, and it's like, really, if they just would have set out of the SEC championship, they would have been in the college football playoffs. But they participated, they lost. I really felt like Alabama proved they were not necessarily a better football team. Like if they were to play 10 times, they would win a majority. But I would say that in that particular game, despite the fact the score was pretty close, I thought Alabama clearly showed on that night they were the better team. Uh, but the score was close. And so there was a lot of justification to leave Georgia in the playoffs. There was only 4 teams at that time. But when you've got all these SEC teams at the back that are, vying for, a limited number of playoff spots, maybe some chaos over these next 2 weeks in some other places can help, or maybe it's a situation where, there's going to be some 10-2 SEC teams, several of them, and I would say multiple, who don't end up getting to go to the college football playoff.
So the way I understand this, Clint, is that they take like the composite record wins, like the winning percentage of the teams that you've played and beaten, and that's kind of how this all works out. And since Bama didn't play, well, and I guess, I mean, Auburn's one of those bad teams. Oklahoma's one of those bad teams, right? So, I mean, I get that has to work against you, but they didn't play Kentucky. They didn't play Mississippi State. I don't know how people have like done all this math where they're going, because right now Oklahoma and Auburn have got 1 win, and those are the teams you got to play the rest of the way. But I'm hearing the same thing you're hearing, and that's that Bama's going to get in if they win out. They got to win out first. Can you imagine though, if you're like Ole Miss, like you would love to be in this game, right?
Oh, yeah.
If you're Texas A&M, you would love to be in this game. Tennessee, love to be in this game. Even with the college football playoff, those fan bases are probably saying, hey, man, put us in. We'll take this.
Well, I mean, and here, it hurt Alabama in some ways, in my opinion, that LSU lost to Florida. It also created an easier path for Alabama to get to the SEC championship by that happening. But who it hurt the most, in my opinion, is Ole Miss. Because now Ole Miss, you look at Alabama, one of their losses is to a really good Tennessee team that's, probably after losing to Georgia, they actually might drop out of the top 12, but they're certainly in that college football playoff discussion. You look at Georgia, one of their losses is to Alabama. The other is to Ole Miss. Now, it was a sound defeat against Ole Miss, but, those are 2 teams that are also vying for college football playoff spots. They also have a very decisive victory against Texas. And then you look at Ole Miss, and it's like their 2 losses are to LSU, who's now 6-4, and Kentucky, who's now 4-6. So 10-10 overall record from their 2 losses. That's not great. I think Ole Miss is not in a great position right now. I don't think Tennessee is in a great position right now. Now we'll have to see how the committee feels, but with where Alabama's at, it's just a matter of what is if you are in this, Alabama's sitting at number 10, They'll probably climb up to number 9 with Tennessee losing. If you're in that range and you don't participate in the SEC championship game, you're guaranteed in. If you play in the SEC championship and you lose, you're dropping some. It's a matter of how much. And I will say, the more I've thought about it, because everybody knows, even as recently as 12 hours ago, last night, I was talking a lot about how Alabama's in no matter what. If they make it to the SEC championship, I still feel pretty good about that, but you are running a risk. And so I certainly understand people who are worried about that, because you'll just have to wait and see what happens, I guess.
Well said, man. Well said. And talking about well said people, there he is right there, Chris Marler. What's up, dude? Happy Sunday to you, my friend. Your reflections on Alabama's game, and then kind of where we are with this SEC championship game race.
I want no part of being in Atlanta. I don't want to go to Atlanta at all. I jokingly said I'm from Atlanta. I think I have an ATL Ho sign over here on my wall. I want no part of going to Atlanta. But I will say this. Like, yesterday was great. I thought they looked really good. My biggest thing was just get out of there with no injuries. It seems like we were able to do that. You got some good stats and numbers from it. I told Clint a few of those beforehand, and we'll probably get to those. But I will say, getting to Atlanta, there is a real chance that Bama can get the bye, because I don't think Texas is that good. And I think that the way they're playing, if they stay hungry, like there's a lot more, I think, at risk if you lose that game. I don't think you are out of the playoff by any means if you lose that game. But if they can get there and win, because Texas just has not – Texas has 2 wins over teams against with winning records all year. And it's Vandy and Colorado State. So I think there's a chance that they get to Atlanta, they can win. But I would rather just get in at 10-2, have a month off to rest and get ready, and then go from there.
Yeah, we've been having this discussion because it's gone back and forth, or at least I've gone back and forth as far as is Alabama safe if they make it to the SEC championship? Are they in no matter what? I've held that belief. But really, when you start looking at it and other teams' resumes and how the committee might view things, they're putting such an emphasis on record that it's like, okay, if you're looking to compare 2 teams on which one gets in, they're both in the SEC. They've both played a comparable schedule. They've maybe against them, maybe like an Ole Miss. You've got 2 bad, I wouldn't say bad losses, but the LSU loss looks worse now than it did before yesterday. The one differential would be, well, Alabama's 10-3, Ole Miss is 10-2. Now I think that's a kind of a toxic, and fans are allowed to do this because they're not the ones, but I will say, the fact that we're approaching it in this way, where it's like they achieve something like making it to the SEC championship in year 1 under Kalen DeBoer, and we're looking at that as a bad thing, and we're saying we really hope it doesn't happen. That tells you how broken the way that this is currently set up is, that you don't want to play in your conference championship. And it's not simply because you're worried you want an extra week off. That's kind of always been the case and when it comes to the 4-team playoff, but it's more so that you are afraid that you could potentially get left out just because you had to play a game against another elite team. I don't think that I like that setup, and I think that's something that they're going to change sooner rather than later.
I don't think it's broken for any other conference but the SEC. And I don't even know if it's broken. Listen, I'm dramatic, Clint. I don't know if broken feels dramatic.
It's not dramatic.
Yeah, no, sir. I'm broken. I don't know if the system is broken, but here's the thing. For everyone else, dude, if you're Colorado, you desperately want to get to the Big 12 championship game and try to win and get in. If you're in the Big 10, listen, we sit here and it's all season. We think we know what we know because of all our pre-confirmed or preconceived biases and whatever else of the cliche phrases that I can't come up with right now. But all the stuff that comes in at the end of December, like Oregon almost got beat last night. If Ohio State beats them, they're going to be in a bye scenario. There's a lot left on the table, I think, for other conferences. Like SMU probably wants to get to the ACC championship game to have a shot at Miami. But in the SEC, you just went through this gauntlet. You already seen what Kirby has said, right? Georgia could have been 9-3 and gone. 9-3 and gone. And all they did was play the hardest schedule in the country. We kept talking about Florida playing the hardest schedule in the country all offseason. Georgia hadn't played at home in over a calendar month. They played 5 teams in the top 15. 4 of them were away from home. And like they were 60 minutes away last night from being left out completely. And I think that everyone, when you look at the SEC, it's difficult to be like it's an even harder road to get there. I don't think that the team that loses will get left out if it's a 10-3 team. But man, listen, if Texas loses to A&M in a couple weeks, they're probably going to get left out of the playoff because of their strength of schedule. There's just so much left. There's so much meat on the bone left in the regular season, even though it doesn't really feel like it.
Go ahead, Mick.
No, go ahead. You follow up.
Just to me, it's so a lot of times we approach it like a 10-2 Alabama can't get left out, period.
Right.
Or, a 10-3 Alabama can't get left out. Really, it's when you start saying, okay, how is the committee approaching things throughout this process? What are they revealing? It's so interesting how for years Georgia was criticized by everybody for not having a tough schedule. And they're winning national championships when they're getting to those really tough games later in the year. But everybody says, their schedule's a joke. And yet those same people will put Indiana number 2 right now in their rankings just because they're undefeated. And Georgia's got the number 1 strength of schedule. And you're over here trying to, put them on the back burner at 11 or 12 or leaving them out of the playoffs potentially. And it's like, okay, how does we can't be flip-flopping here. Either strength of schedule is important or it's not. And, I understand you got to add context to things. There are aspects as far as what are other teams or programs doing. But what's real simple is and Georgia is the prime example where they were criticized for so long for having easy schedules. And those same people who were criticizing them are now propping up Indiana, who's had an even easier schedule. I think their strength of schedule is ranked outside the top 100. It is a complete outlier compared to anybody else in the college football playoff hunt. And yet we ignored that. And you've got certain people not only putting them at 5 or 6. I mean, I feel like that's the range, but some of those same people are putting them at number 2 or number 3. That makes no sense to me.
Do you want to know what it is right now? This is the updated ESPN FPI. And listen, I say this every week in these articles and stuff that I write. Like FPI is stupid. Like FPI is stupid as shit. Excuse my language, but like, do you remember when Bama lost to LSU in 2019? Bama was still ranked ahead of LSU for like 2 weeks after that in the ESPN FPI. But it's important to look at least the resumes and the metrics and analytics they use, because that's what they're going to use going into the actual like the committee room. And when they talk about it on ESPN, like these are still the numbers and like, they're basing everything off of. The strength of schedule for Indiana right now is 106th. It was 100th last week. The bye week cost them 6 spots, and they're going to play Ohio State. But guys, like the leaves are changing. My like me and Allie and all that, we're talking about green bean casserole and sweet potato souffle recipes and all that. It's almost Thanksgiving. They had the 106th ranked strength of schedule in the country, and it's like, how is that possible? What is a souffle, by the way?
You starting to get ready for Thanksgiving? Starting to line those plans up?
Yeah, I'm pumped, man.
Pretty hungry?
Yeah,
look, I'm with you. I'm so curious just to see. Well, first off, I agree on the Georgia stuff. I mean, they won championships. It happened for Bama too, where there were years they just didn't play anybody because of the way things fell. And then they got into the playoff and ran over people, or got into the BCS and rolled over teams and won. Georgia had some of the worst schedules week-wise. Now they play a really tough schedule. I knew they could not possibly lose that game. And when they started slow against Tennessee, I was like, man, they're going to be out. People there are going to riot. It's going to be terrible. And then they came back and won. But, man, it'd just be so hard not to take advantage of a chance to win an SEC championship. I mean, those you get a ring for that, like that goes on the wall. Like, hey, we won the SEC championship. I think for Alabama, though, these games, they're not trap games, but they're games that they could potentially lose, and that's what Clint and I were talking about as well. If they don't go out there and stay focused, and also to me, and I'll get your opinion on it, one of the biggest issues that they've had over the last few years is handling success. They've got to handle success.
Yeah. Well, real quick, I just have to share this because I was deep in the numbers and deep digestion. I told this to Clint, Mick. You know that Tennessee against Georgia, Tennessee has scored first in 5 straight games in that series. They've scored first against Georgia in 5 straight games. They have then been outscored at the end of it by a total of 103 points and lost by an average of 20.6 points per game. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. That's nuts.
Yeah. And so the handling success part, I think, is huge. Like this team, we saw what they did when they were able to regroup off a bye. Going to Oklahoma does not concern me because Oklahoma has no offense. Like this feels very much like I'm not trying to jinx anything, but like this feels very much like if you can get to 17 or if you can get to 14, you should be able to win. Maybe there's some sloppy things that happen. I will also say that Jalen Milroe in the month of November has been playing his best football over the past 2 years. He's got like 23 total touchdowns, 1 interception in November games over the last 2 seasons. So he's protected the football. He's played really, really well. I think that they can continue that in Oklahoma. The Auburn thing, it's Auburn. So any craziness can happen. I have a hard time thinking that this group is going to overlook an Auburn team after what happened last year. So that's my take on it. I hope they can handle success. But also the other part too is, man, how great does this team look with Kalen DeBoer off a bye week? Because they have been world beaters coming off the bye both times this season.
Well, and it's and I've actually pointed out a couple of times that it's not just the bye week. Anytime you've given Kalen DeBoer as a head coach multiple weeks to prepare, whether that be coming off a bye week or going into a bowl game, they have performed extremely well. I think now they're 8-0 under him. You've seen wins over Oregon, at Washington, over a top 25 Texas team. They beat Texas in the first round of the college football playoff last year. LSU, Georgia. I mean, it's just you give this guy some time to prepare, and that was kind of a big thing with Nick Saban back when really probably at least throughout most of his career as the coach at Alabama is you give him multiple weeks to prepare. It's going into a season opener, or it's going into it's going into a bowl game or a national championship or whatever. They're going to come ready and prepared. And so far we've seen that. And probably now that I think about it, the season openers probably count with that too. I should probably include those and go back and add them. I have no idea what that record is, but just, in season when they've really needed to do that, he's been phenomenal at it. And I will say with Chris, does it not feel like to you that both the offense and the defense is really starting to, definitely don't want to say peak, but they're moving on an upward trajectory, playing more complementary football. And it seems like guys are a lot more comfortable. I just think that when you look at all the teams in college football, Alabama feels like one of the best 4 teams, or excuse me, one of the best 12 teams.
I honestly, the way they're playing right now, you can make the case for either. Like Miami has their defense. They're going to be a top 4 team. BYU lost last night. There's a chance that Boise State, I don't really get this. There's a chance that Boise State can get a bye and have the 4 seed, which I will. My head has been in a pretzel trying to read just the SEC tiebreaker, so I can't even wrap my head around that yet. But I think that you're right. I think that the thing that I forgot about, at least, and maybe a lot of other people forgot about too, is when we started getting those injuries in the secondary and on defense, especially, they were already so thin. You lost 12 players this offseason to either the portal or to the NFL draft and just in the secondary, right? You lost 41 total, 12 of them in the secondary, which is insane. So you already had a very, very thin secondary, very, very young secondary, but it's game 10 and they're growing up. And you look at Damani Jackson, it's a guy that, to be honest, I watched that guy in the start of the year. I didn't feel like he ever wanted to get his hands dirty and get in any sort of physical altercation on the field and try to lower a shoulder or get into any kind of gritty tackling situation. Basically, yesterday you see him chase down the kid from behind, punch out a ball, and this swarm defense that we heard so much about. has been swarming. I mean, like they have done an incredible job at forcing turnovers. I mean, and really out of like a single high safety look, like a pretty basic look, it feels like applied pressure all night on LSU. They applied pressure in against Missouri all game. Like they have looked really good. And I again, if this situation goes the way we hope it goes the rest of the year, I think the turning point of this entire team, I think from the fans buying back in, all that kind of stuff, is when on 4th and 1, they put the starters back in against Missouri. I feel like I talk about it every week, but like it feels like that was like a seminal point for this team and for everyone to be like, hey, we're still Alabama. We still have we still have a lot of pride, and we're gonna fight for like the, I don't say logo on the jersey. We don't have one really. A little small circle, but you know what I mean? And we don't have one on the helmet. So now I'm out of cliches, guys.
Yeah, I love that too, man. I like the fact that when in Tennessee, Womack was like, hey, we're this close. And then all of a sudden we've seen a different team since then defensively. But you just wonder what that's going to look like against Oklahoma. Alabama's had some blowout wins, which have been nice, but now all of a sudden you play them, and then Auburn's season, as bad as it is, could be a great season if they beat us.
Always.
And that game's so scary because they may say, hey, we don't even care about Texas A&M. Let's just go ahead and lose that one because we lose every other game, but we're going to beat Alabama and them take 2 weeks to get ready for us. It felt like they did that last year.
They did that last year. Listen, if you ever need an example of how much Bama means to Auburn, just look at Auburn memes Twitter. Just, like that, love him to death, good dude in real life. But I mean, I just monopolized the entire portion of rent. Imagine it's not even rent; it's the entire building that they have taken up space for Auburn memes. I mean, like I think you're right, Mick. Like I mean, that would make their entire season. And here's the thing, Hugh Freeze desperately needs something to go into next year. So like it's usually in Jordan Hare when something like that happens, but like it could easily look a lot like that 2009 game where it's like you settle in, you sit there on the couch, or in y'all's case, probably in the in the press box. I'm not a real journalist, so I'm me on the couch. And then you have like as soon as you sit down, you've got Gus Malzahn running the oop-de-doop double reverse pass, and it's down 14-0 at the start because they're going to air it out. Like that. They have a bell cow in the backfield. They refuse to give them the ball.
Yeah, that in the entire Auburn is really they got a very poor offensive line. I would say the offensive line play mostly in the SEC, but really around college football feels down. But Auburn obviously with record and stuff, it goes beyond that. And the fact that they have a quarterback who turns the football over, he can't overcome. They finally put some weapons around him, and those guys are still growing. There's been some growing pains with the youth and stuff, but I mean, Smith Lambert, he's been phenomenal. Being a veteran guy transferring in from Penn State, but Auburn to me is very. They've got aspects that can really cause you problems, but turning the football over is a big issue when you're going against Alabama's defense. And you're in Bryant-Denny Stadium and you're dealing with that crowd noise. So you never want to write them off. And I completely agree. I've been right there with you where it's like everything for them is going to be riding on this game. You're not going to a bowl. You're not going, obviously, the whole idea of like people are talking about 9-win seasons and some overly optimistic. We're talking about 10 wins. I thought kind of 8-4 was absolute ceiling. I thought 7-5 was more of the sweet spot, and I was even overshooting that. So it's like, but as far as the recruiting class, if you sign a good recruiting class in early December here in a few weeks, and you beat Alabama, leading up to that, that is a ton of momentum for them right now with Nick Saban being retired. Kalen DeBoer is trying to kind of establish himself as the premier, Alabama's, and they're still going to be the premier program in the state of Alabama, but Auburn's trying to kind of, shorten that gap a little bit, close the gap a little bit. And, that would really hand them a lot of momentum. So that's a very important game for a number of reasons. Obviously, Chris, do you think that maybe style points for Alabama needs to be a thing if you're talking about, and I don't like the fact that we're focusing so much on a potential loss, because what you're doing is you're saying it's like everybody's saying, okay, if they make it to the SEC championship, it's a loss. And I really don't like that mentality. I hope that doesn't, players aren't reading social media and buying into that. I'm being guilty of it right now too. But what I will say is if you just you continue to play like one of the best teams in the country. You handle Oklahoma, you handle Auburn. I mean, do you think style points here in these last couple of weeks could really help Alabama differentiate themselves, because the opponents they're not really going to do it. No one's going to give them credit because of record, even though I think they're two tougher opponents than people think that they are. What do you think about style points right now for Alabama?
I'm gonna be honest. I'm having a hard time focusing on anything you're saying, because you look like skinny Luke Combs today, and you look great for one. Two,
Bro, I get little Luke Combs comparisons all the time, and
skinny
know
Luke
what? No. I will say thank you so much for throwing that one word in there, because that one word makes all. And hey, you can look like Luke Combs if you can, play a couple chords on the guitar. And I have
like
one
that
I have sitting in my background a lot, but I
We're
can't
good.
play nothing on that
Yeah.
thing.
We're good on that.
Skinny,
Nobody likes that guy. You ever seen that guy at the airport? Somebody walking around with a guitar, like, Brody, where are you going? Where are you going?
All right, Dave Matthews, calm down.
Yeah. So the other part is, I don't think style points. I really don't think style points are going to matter. I think that, like, when you look at what this team has done, the LSU loss yesterday doesn't necessarily help Bama, but like this is what we heard so often 2 years ago. They had 2 losses by 4 points on the road. This year, what was the Tennessee score? Was it 24-17 or 21-17?
24-17.
Okay, so you have 2 losses by 12 points, both on the road. I know the Vandy loss is I do feel like the Vandy loss is coming around to where people are like, it's not a bad football team. Like, and I think that because in the very same breath that you're talking about Vandy, anyone that wants to mock the Vandy thing, they have to also look at what they did to Texas in a game where they had 3 turnovers and lost by 3 total points. So I do think that that isn't as bad of a loss as people think. I say going into the season, I don't think that everyone that kept talking about, oh, if you get 10-2, you're in. There's gonna be 9-3 SEC teams in. It's like that always felt like fool's gold and stupid. Great Matthew McConaughey movie, by the way. And going into a season where it's like, oh yeah, because we've never seen a 12-team playoff. Like, everyone was talking these like absolutes, but we've never seen a 12-team playoff. So I always thought that part was a little bit dumb. I don't think you're going to need style points. Now, I will say, if you go into Oklahoma, I think we're a 13.5-point favorite right now against Oklahoma. I don't know what the early line on Auburn will be. It'll probably be around, I would say, 14 to 17 points. If you're able, I honestly, I'm not trying to make excuses or say anything like this, but I think that even if they just skate by Auburn, enough crazy shit has happened against that team over the last decade or the last 11 years that people are going to look at that and say they barely beat Auburn and Auburn's not good. They're 5-7 or whatever the record is. But there's always something crazy that happens in that game. There's always some kind of craziness that happens in the Auburn game. And I truly believe that's what the actual response would be from like nationwide.
Well, the interesting point about that is, I mean, the last 2 times, now granted, in Jordan-Hare Stadium, that could create a little bit of a different narrative, but the last 2 times Alabama's gone to Jordan-Hare, they've barely squeaked by, and then they've gone and kicked the shit out of Georgia the next week in the SEC championship. So, that very quickly goes out the window when you followed up with that type of performance. Now, granted, you've had that opportunity to kind of right the ship after looking poorly. Would Alabama have been, in a tougher position had they not played in the SEC championship in those 2 seasons, and that was the last thing they left with people? Maybe. I'm just worried about the narrative, and I think Mick's rubbing off on me. I'm worrying more than normal about this, but I'm worried that this whole narrative of South Carolina's ended up being a much better team than people realized. Vanderbilt's ended up being a much better team. But the fact that you looked rough in the second half against Georgia, the fact that you looked rough against Vanderbilt, against Tennessee, against South Carolina, I worry that, without right now the narrative is they're playing their best football. If they squeak by wins against teams where people are only really going to be looking at the records at that point, maybe not with Auburn because you do have that you're talking about, but I worry that people are going to, and will the committee let this affect them? Maybe not. I don't know what affects them. I mean, it's a human element to it, but if the whole narrative of everybody is, man, they've barely squeaked by. So like we've been saying it about Miami, right? I mean, they've won some games they should have lost, period.
Right.
And with Alabama, it's like if they don't finish strong, you can't make the argument nobody's playing better football, or very few teams are playing better football right now than Alabama. And I think having that strong conversation going into the SEC championship, if you play a college football playoff team and you lose a close one, does that narrative really change? I don't know how important narratives are here, but I feel like they could be important.
And I just looked at the line, 5. Auburn's a 5-point dog to Texas A&M. So
that's the worst line in football.
Yeah, but they lose all.
I think they're going to beat A&M. I really do. I've said that for
because I don't think
A&M's that good. A&M hasn't played anybody.
You think Auburn's going to beat A&M?
Yeah.
Well, is that Chris's lock of the week? Are you getting on Sunday?
Absolutely not. And also, Chris's lock of the week
it in. It's done.
Been good.
We'll get you a graphic made up. It'll look real.
Yeah.
It'll look real good.
No, I mean, yeah. I think you remember the time that I made that stupid graphic that said Dwayne the Lock Johnson, and it took me like 4 hours to do in Canva. And then when I posted it, somebody was like, "This is the lamest shit I've ever seen in my life." And I was like,
Well, you got Oklahoma this week. If they spend too much time thinking about the SEC championship game, there's a lot of snaps that could fall. I know that's our job to talk about it, but man, I'm looking forward to this matchup, the helmet matchup. You know, they're blood. It was exciting to add them to the conference. Unlike Texas, they've actually had a pretty tough schedule this year. But what do you guys think Oklahoma brings to the SEC, and how's the transition been for them? Well,
real quick, I think if you're just looking for, I know we're always pessimistic on this show. It feels like a lot of times, but like if you're looking for something that is like some sort of positive like stat going into these last 2 games, Oklahoma has given up the second most sacks in the country all year, like 41 total sacks allowed this year. They've given up, I think, 32 in 6 conference games, which is ridiculous. That's the worst in the country of any team in their conference. Auburn has also given up the second. They've had the second most turnovers of any Power 4 team in the country as well. So like those are 2 things that Bama does really well: getting to the quarterback, at least pressuring the quarterback, and then also forcing turnovers. So I do think that those 2 things were great. Man, what Oklahoma brings the SEC, it's been fun to watch them be humbled, because that's a program that has really bullied the Big 12 for a long time, and their fans, I think, kind of thought they were going to do the same going into this year. They have battled a lot of injuries, but I will also say I just need to know what was said behind closed doors, or what deals were made behind closed doors between Greg Sankey and Texas versus Greg Sankey and Oklahoma. Because the schedule that they got versus the schedule that Texas has got, or the schedule Texas got, is night and day, just night and day. But Norman seems like a fun place. I don't know much about the state of Oklahoma outside of the movie Twister and that Tiger King documentary that held the country together like a bad Band-Aid in 2020. But other than that, yeah, I mean, like they play some pretty good football. They have over the years, at least.
Yeah, I mean, and if that buggy falls over in pregame, that's now that's now an SEC thing, man. We might see that this weekend. We don't know. I don't see how that happens more than once, because the first time it happened, they should have never done that tradition again. But here we are.
Reuben Foster would have just come out of the locker room and knocked that thing over himself. Like he would have taken a targeting penalty before the start of the game.
Okay, all right. Mick, do you got anything else for Chris?
No, I think I'm
on that note. My bad, guys.
I think I'm set today. I just can't believe Oklahoma is not in a panic like we would be.
Yeah.
If our team was that bad for 2 straight years. Like, can you imagine us being in that spot where, like, you know, we're giving our coach a vote of confidence, and yet we stink. Recruiting isn't great.
Well, hold up now. I mean, Auburn's been doing it for half a decade.
Year.
Auburn's been doing this for half a decade, man. Like this feels very.
That's their whole personality now.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder, are you saying that Oklahoma's the next Auburn?
I feel like Oklahoma with Venables as their head coach is like Alabama with Mike Shula. You know, it's like, well, he's like a good dude. He played for us. Like, he's our guy. You know, he's going to get it figured out. But what you got to remember is it's normally really easy to see when a coach comes in what things are going to do. You know, because you kind of feel like this. And I know it's a tough conference. Maybe that's changed a little bit, but I feel like with Oklahoma, it's been this. It's been going down. There's really no hype. That guy shows up, you don't know who he is. Like nobody's going, oh, there's Will Venables. Nobody, you don't even know him. And I feel like Kalen DeBoer kind of has a little of this too, where it's you're trying to be able to have that walk into the room and people know who you are thing, and it takes a little while of success. But he was in the college football playoff in the championship game last year, so the way you get out of it is you go out and buy somebody. And Oklahoma went out and got that guy when they should probably have taken Josh Heupel. And they probably could have got him, but there's obviously there's a rift in the family because Stoops fired him. But I mean, can you imagine like Heupel at Oklahoma?
Awesome.
Like they'd be Oklahoma again. They're not saying they can't beat Alabama, but this Oklahoma feels a lot like the Shula days, Alabama. We would show up, everybody would see the uniforms, and then you would lose to all these teams, and that nobody tore the goalpost down. It wasn't that big of a deal. It was like, hey, you know what? We got to the point where teams were just like, well, it's Alabama, and we beat them.
The biggest thing with Oklahoma, I think that's like a reminder. And this, I didn't even know about this. I feel like I didn't know about this until like a couple of years ago, and you saw how important it really is. But like we put so much on the quarterback and we put so much on the head coach in terms of success for each team. But the hiring of coordinators continues to be probably the most important thing that a head coach can do in his first couple of years. You look at Ed Orgeron. Look at what he was able to do when he had Aranda and he had what's his name? Joe Brady as the passing game coordinator, all that kind of stuff. But like you look at and see like Levy's gone. Levy's gone, and now you look and see what the offense looks like. I mean, it's not just they backtracked a little bit. Like LSU has backtracked a little bit this year from last year's team. This Oklahoma team has fallen off a cliff. Like they were like 125th or worse in like almost every major category like 3 weeks ago.
Well, I mean, and I think Arkansas and Sam Pittman's another great example. Like with what he had as far as coordinators when he first came in, and the how he was able to get things started. Then he loses those coordinators and things fall off a cliff. And now he's got what's his name, Petrino, as his offensive coordinator. And now things are starting to bounce back a little bit. I mean, it's still relative to expectations. It's but I still think coordinators certainly matter when it comes to the Razorbacks, just like it does with everybody else. But for you covering South Carolina specifically, because I really think Bama fans right now, the fact that Vanderbilt's a better team than people were giving them credit for. And so that's great, but they've kind of softened a little bit. South Carolina's playing really good football right now. I mean, their only 3 losses are to what? LSU, Ole Miss, and Alabama.
By
LSU.
3. Bama by 2.
Yes.
They lost to LSU by 3, Bama by 2, and then they get blown out by Ole Miss. I will say this. I live in Columbia, South Carolina. I host Locked On Gamecocks, and it's been a really fun season. I don't care how this sounds. It feels like you're like America's team. Like that win yesterday against Missouri, they just, for whatever reason, South Carolina, Bama will never have this. Bama will never have people pulling for Bama like all over the country. Last year you had it a little bit because of how great the story was with Milroe, and they had to come back and from losing like early.
Underdog, right? You're saying it's like an underdog. Like everybody. Right. Yeah, I got you.
And people like South Carolina for the most part, and it's been a fun season, man. Like they're not gonna probably not gonna make the playoff unless a bunch of chaos happens. But man, that game yesterday was awesome.
Well, and I mean, I would say it's interesting because the two teams that everybody was criticizing Alabama for A, one losing, and B, not playing well and almost blowing it was Vanderbilt and South Carolina. And I would say right now they're probably America's 2 teams. Like I've been paying attention to, I've been watching Vanderbilt every time they've played. When I sometimes I got to go back and watch them, but they're a fun team to watch. Pavia has been fantastic, but I just find it so fascinating because based off of last year with Shane Beamer, it was like some of the new and the shine had kind of worn off a little bit. And, Sam Pittman has done this to a certain extent, but not even a fraction as much as Shane Beamer at South Carolina. The fact that he's been able to get them to 7-3, top 25 ranking again. I want to say that even though he had pretty good records his first 2 years, I mean, I think the best he had was like a 4-4 SEC record. So I think he's 4-3 right now, or
Dude, they were 2-10 in this first 3 years in SEC road games, and then they come out this year and they beat Kentucky by 25. They beat Oklahoma by 26 or 24 or whatever it was. Like they lose to Bama by 2. Like they have been they beat Vandy by more than anyone beat Vandy. They beat them by 21. So that's like it ends up being like a little feather in the cap for them. But I've always said this, and I made the skinny Luke Combs thing. So maybe this is just me going to the well too much. But I've always said that Shane Beamer is just skinny Sam Pittman. I got in trouble for saying it because I think I said Ozempic Sam Pittman, and Locked On had to cut it off. They were like, "We're not gonna touch that."
Okay. Well, you're 100% right. I do feel like South Carolina. What I loved is after Eli Drinkwitz made that very dumb comment after beating who did they beat last week?
Oklahoma.
Anyway, yeah, Oklahoma. He won that game. And they were like, we're still in the playoff, conversation. Yeah, I said it in that post game. And then you go get credit to them for coming back and making it a respectable score. But South Carolina was kicking the hell out of them for a while. But yeah, no, I wanted to give you a chance because that right now, that win for Alabama is certainly playing a factor as far as strength of schedule, resume, the whole 9 yards. Good on Shane Beamer and good on South Carolina. Mick, you got anything else, brother?
No, look, and I watched the Missouri-South Carolina game. That was really, really exciting. What a fun game to watch. Both really good teams. I watched Georgia and Tennessee, and I thought that was a really good game too. That's what you want every Saturday, right? Just to watch really fun football games and kind of pick the matchups and enjoy watching teams play. So Bama's going to play Oklahoma. I hope that it's not that enjoyable for Oklahoma fans. I hope we go in there and take care of business. But look, good to see you guys. What do you got going on? Cover Crimson and covercrimson.com, Clint. And people, you can sign up for that right now. Do it. I know some of you guys are saying, hey, where's my T-shirt? T-shirts are coming. You get the annual subscription. We're going to hook you up. No doubt about it. But thank you for being part of it. Message board's always fun. And then, like I said, we're in a redesign right now. People that are on board now are going to have that badge when the new site comes out. That'll be like, hey, I'm an OG. Been here since the beginning. But Clint, I know snap count's one of those things.
Yeah, definitely got the snap counts coming out. And that's going to be a wild one because so many different guys played. 4 quarterbacks. But we'll be talking about that from here on out. I understand schedule or a record. People are going to talk about that, but it's Alabama's in a really good place as far as interesting matchups going on the road to play Oklahoma at Norman. The Iron Bowl, potentially SEC championship, potentially college football playoff. So it's going to be this YouTube channel is going to have a ton of great content, message board, a lot of conversations where we're doing the playoff talk stuff, looking at scenarios. Doing all that stuff. So, and who knows, at some point we might be able to get, Chris Marler to come join us and maybe throw out a couple of terrible opinions. If he calls me skinny Luke Combs again, though, I'm going to ban him immediatally.
We might be able to do it in Atlanta. If they make it to the SEC championship, we'll have to meet up and do a live show.
You trying to?
That'd be fun.
Trying to catch skinny Luke Combs' hands? Chris?
No. I would take those hands as long as they're not anywhere around the guitar. I'll say that.
Okay. All right. Yeah, we got a lot going on. If you haven't already, subscribe to the YouTube channel. And also like this video, share it. All that stuff certainly helps. And then get over to covercrimson.com and join the message board community. It's been a lot of fun. It's going to continue to be a lot of fun. And, we'll see where things go from here.
Right. That's right. Well, for Chris and Clint, I'm Mick, brought to you by mybookie.ag, promo code next round to double your initial deposit. And look, maybe you're looking at that five and change spread for Texas A&M at Auburn. Go for it. Hey, yesterday I kept telling everybody that 10, not 9.5, 10 for Tennessee at the Georgia game was my lock of the year. And I was on it. I was a little worried, I got to tell you, but they certainly covered. I figured they would. Tennessee came out with a good game plan, and then they covered. So somebody bought a new house today at mybookie.ag on my picks. All right, guys, thanks for hanging out with us. We'll be back tomorrow, and roll tide, everybody.